Hey guys, tonight we step quietly through a creaking wooden door, into a world where your breath fogs in the air even though you're already indoors. The flicker of a low fire paints trembling orange across rough-hewn beams, and somewhere in the rafters you hear a slow drip of water finding its way through thatch. This is Tudor Britain, and you're about to spend a single night inside a home whose walls are thin, whose floors are damp, and whose hearth gives off more smoke than warmth. You probably won't survive this without a sneeze or a rash, but for now you're just a visitor. No need to panic yet. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I love knowing where my listeners are from, so post your location and your local time in the comments. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push the door a little wider and step across the threshold. The latch feels rough against your palm, hand-forged iron, cold and slightly greasy from years of use. The first thing that hits you isn't the sight but the smell, a cocktail of smoke, damp wood, old rushes, and human life. Historians still argue whether Tudor houses smelled worse than the streets outside or whether your modern nose just isn't used to it. Either way, it's a shock. Your eyes take a moment to adjust to the gloom. There's no electric bulb overhead, only a tallow candle guttering on a small oak table. It throws a greasy light over everything, like a sepia Instagram filter but without the nostalgia. You reach out to touch the wall. Instead of plasterboard, you find a lumpy, uneven surface, wattle and daub, a medieval version of drywall made from woven sticks and clay. You can feel the cool moisture clinging to it, as though the whole house is breathing a damp sigh. Another breath of air wafts in from a gap near the doorframe. This place isn't sealed. Every joint between timber and daub is another miniature window for the cold to creep through. You hug yourself instinctively, rubbing your arms like you would on a chilly bus stop. A few embers snap in the open hearth across the room, but their glow does little to chase away the draft. Imagine camping in your living room and you're close. Somewhere overhead in the thatch, a sparrow, or maybe a mouse, rustles. People of the time accepted this soundtrack as normal. You, used to double glazing and pest control, can't help thinking of an Airbnb review gone horribly wrong. Yet this was home. Even relatively well-off families lived with the same basic building materials and the same inescapable chill. You step further inside. The floor is uneven and gives a little under your weight. No polished wood or tile here, just compacted earth covered with a scatter of rushes meant to absorb spills and smells. At first it seems quaint, like a rustic rug. Then you notice the dark patches where the rushes have matted into something almost swampy. One mainstream historical fact everyone agrees on: the rushes weren't changed daily. They might sit for months, with new layers sprinkled over the old like a medieval lasagna. That faint musty odor rising up is history itself. On the far wall, a small window lets in a dull glow from outside. You shuffle toward it and see not glass but a thin sheet of translucent horn, like wax paper nailed into a lattice frame. It bends the winter sunlight into a milky smear. No wonder everyone here moved by candlelight even at noon. You imagine trying to read or sew in this murk. Even your phone screen wouldn't help. There's no outlet to charge it, and in any case you'd be mobbed with curious looks if you pulled it out. Your guide, let's pretend there's one, a friendly householder, offers you a seat near the fire. The bench creaks as you sit and a little puff of ash rises when you shift your feet. The hearth is central to the room, the heart of the home, but it's also a smoky dragon. Without a proper chimney, the fumes swirl and drift, seeking any exit they can find. Your eyes water. You cough once quietly. The guide chuckles. You'll get used to it, he says, but you won't, not tonight. A quirky tidbit you might not expect. People sometimes hung raw meat from hooks near the ceiling, believing the constant smoke preserved it. So above your head, half lost in shadow, a slab of something may be curing or slowly spoiling. You try not to think about it. The family's few possessions cluster around the walls. A chest for clothing, a few wooden bowls, maybe a pewter plate if they're lucky. Everything smells faintly of soot. You run a finger over a beam and it comes away black. You wonder how anyone kept their teeth clean in such an environment. Then you remember, they mostly didn't. The longer you sit, the more your senses adjust. You hear children upstairs, or rather on the loft floor above, reached by a simple ladder. They're playing some clapping game, their voices drifting down through the cracks. Privacy is a luxury absent here. Every sound is public. Even at night, the cough of an elder, the shifting of a sleeper, the whisper of prayer, nothing is hidden. Another gust sneaks under the door and you pull your cloak tighter. The guide stokes the fire with a long iron poker. Sparks leap up, bright as fireflies, before vanishing into smoke. He tells you this house was built 20 years ago in the reign of Henry VII. Timber from the local woods, wattle woven by his uncle's hands. Historians still argue whether such homes were built to last or simply to get by for a generation. Looking at the sagging beams, you suspect the latter. Yet for all its discomfort, there's a kind of coziness here too. The beams are dark and sturdy, carved with little notches like secret signatures. A string of dried herbs dangles near the hearth, meant to ward off bad air or maybe witches, depending on who you ask. You smile at the superstition but also feel a strange comfort. At least someone cared enough to hang them there. Your eyes drift back to the door. Outside, the frost thickens on the ground. In here, moisture beads along the walls like sweat. The temperature difference is minimal. You might be warmer in a tent with a good sleeping bag. But this is home for a Tudor family, and for tonight, it's yours too. You imagine lying down on the floor beside the hearth, pulling a rough wool blanket over yourself. The smoke would sink into your hair, your skin, your dreams. Tomorrow you'd wake with a cough and a sore throat. The modern part of your brain mutters about mold spores and carbon monoxide. The storyteller part of your brain whispers that this is what life was: close, smoky, communal, and impermanent. One last glance around the room reveals a curious object, a shoe nailed above the lintel. It's an old superstition, a charm against evil spirits slipping in. You think of all the people who have stepped under it, never knowing whether it worked but hopping. In a way, it's no different from the lucky keychains or digital wellness apps of today, just older, smellier, and nailed in place. As you lean back, the fire pops again, and the guide begins telling you how the house was raised, how neighbors helped with the walls, how the thatch was bundled from last summer's harvest. You listen, eyes half closed, feeling the room sway with history. For a moment you almost forget the damp and the cold. This is your first taste of Tudor domestic life, the frost inside the walls, the warmth struggling to break through, and the thousand small adaptations people made to call it home. You lean a little closer to the smoky hearth while the householder, our imaginary guide, starts telling you about the skeleton of the building itself. His words drift in and out of the crackle of the fire, and you imagine them like a gentle bedtime story. You're still in the same dim room, but now your eyes begin to trace the lines of the structure. Those dark beams aren't just decoration. They're the timber bones that hold the whole place upright. Run your fingertips along one. The wood feels ridged and splintery, as though it's still a living thing. This is oak cut from a nearby copse, maybe 30 years ago, he says. The trees were felled green, seasoned only briefly, and then mortised together with wooden pegs instead of nails. It was a method so common nobody thought twice about it. Historians still argue whether this style came to England via medieval guild traditions or from even older Saxon methods. But either way, it gave us the iconic black and white Tudor look you see on tourist postcards today. In your mind's eye, picture the bare frame standing in a muddy yard. Tall posts, diagonal braces, a kind of giant wooden puzzle held upright while the walls are filled in. You're shivering slightly even from the thought, because you know that all those gaps between posts have to be sealed with something, and that something isn't brick. It's wattle and daub, a phrase that sounds quaint until you realize it literally means woven sticks plastered with a mix of clay, straw, and whatever else was at hand. Some manuals of the time even mention horsehair or cow dung as binders. You pull your sleeve back from the wall without thinking. One mainstream fact stands out. This composite material was cheap and quick, but it soaked up water like a sponge. In a wet English winter, the daub absorbed rain and exhaled chill into the room. You can actually see a faint sheen of dampness glimmering in the candlelight where the clay has darkened. No wonder you're hugging yourself like someone waiting for a delayed bus. A quirky tidbit your guide mentions with a grin. Some families press seashells, bits of pottery, or even children's marbles into the daub as it dried, both for decoration and as tiny charms against evil spirits. If you look closely enough at the wall near the hearth, you can see a blue shard peeking out like a secret. You take a slow lap around the room, trailing your hand along the beams. Everywhere there's a gap, cold air sneaks in. Instead of insulation, there's just the thickness of the clay and a prayer that the wind won't shift. Above, the timber trusses meet like giant ribs. You crane your neck to look at the roof. No attic as you know it, just a dark hollow between you and the thatch, open to drafts, insects, and the odd bird that's lost its way. The householder explains how building a home like this was a community affair. Neighbors turned out to help raise the frame, a bit like a barn raising in old American tailies. It took a day or two to get the posts upright, then weeks of lacing wattle and smearing daub, layer upon layer, until the walls were thick enough to stand. Even then, hairline cracks appeared with the first frost. People stuffed moss or rags into them, but the chill always found a path. You think about your own home's walls, layers of plasterboard, insulation, wiring, drywall, and realize how many barriers stand between you and the weather. Here there's basically one: mud. It gives the interior an earthy smell, a constant reminder you're half indoors, half outdoors. Somewhere outside a dog barks. The sound comes right through the wall as though there were no wall at all. Children's laughter, the clank of a bucket at the well, a whiff of manure from a neighbor's yard, everything drifts in, mixing with the smoke you're already breathing. Historians still argue whether Tudor villagers even thought of inside and outside as two separate realms the way we do. To them, it might have been more like degrees of shelter rather than two distinct worlds. You stop at a corner where two beams meet. There's a faint white bloom on the wood, mildew, perhaps, or salt efflorescence from rising damp. You draw a little circle in it with your finger and it comes away wet. In modern terms, this would be a building inspector's nightmare. In Tudor terms, it was Tuesday. As the guide talks, you imagine the construction process in more detail. The smell of green oak being cut, the slap of clay on sticks, the chatter of neighbors as they work. There's a kind of rough poetry in it. Yet you also imagine the first winter after moving in, when the daub shrinks and cracks, and you have to plug the holes with straw while the children huddle under a blanket. It's not a fairy tale cottage anymore, but a living thing that constantly needs mending. A fringe theory floats through your mind. Some antiquarians once suggested that the dark timber beams weren't originally meant to be exposed at all, but were lime-washed along with the daub so the whole house appeared pale, almost ghostly. Only later, when soot and weather darkened the wood, did the black and white style become a badge of age. Whether that's true or not, your eyes trace the black lines like a spider's web holding everything together. You sit back down by the fire. The floor beneath you is still earth, but you're more aware now of what holds it all above your head. You picture the posts driven into the ground without footings, slowly wicking up moisture. No wonder so many of these houses lean after a few decades. Your guide shrugs when you point to a visible tilt in one of the door frames. "It's been standing since my grandfather's time," he says, "and it will see me out too." You're not so sure. Another quirky note. Some people carved tiny symbols into the beams as they were raised, marks like little suns, circles, or cross hatches. Modern scholars call them apotropaic signs, meant to turn away fire, witches, or misfortune. If you squint at the lintel above, you can see one, a faint scratched star half lost in soot. It's comforting in a way to know that even builders 500 years ago left a signature of hope inside their work. You lean your head back, eyes half closed, and listen to the timber creak as the wind pushes against it. It's almost like a ship at sea, groaning against the tide. In a moment you feel drowsy, the kind of soft tiredness that comes when a story slows your heartbeat. The walls may be cold, the daub may be damp, but they hold 1,000 stories in their seams. You tilt your head back from the smoky hearth, following the creaking beams upward until your gaze disappears into darkness. There, somewhere above the rafters, a different world exists, a spongy, rustling canopy of straw and reeds that does far more than keep the rain out. Tonight, in your borrowed Tudor home, the roof is as alive as the floor beneath your boots. You draw a deep breath, smell the faint tang of dry grass mixed with soot, and realize the ceiling itself could tell stories if only it had a mouth. You shift on the bench and the guide notices your upward glance. "Ah," he says softly, "the thatch keeps the wind off, mostly." His eyes twinkle in the candlelight. You picture his whole family sleeping under this same roof, year after year, rain or shine. It feels permanent in the way only something handmade can feel, but your modern brain sees a fire hazard, a pest magnet, and a nightmare for an insurance adjuster. The beams over your head are rough oak, just like the walls, and nailed or pegged into a simple triangular truss. Instead of tiles or slate, the outer covering is hundreds of tightly bound bundles of straw, laid thick and overlapping like scales on a dragon's back. It's a mainstream historical fact thatched roofs were standard for all but the wealthiest city houses in Tudor England. Tiles and slate were expensive and reserved for churches, manors, and official buildings. For everyone else, straw was cheap, renewable, and familiar. But as your guide talks, you start to picture the roof from the inside. The straw bundles are lashed to laths with split willow or hemp cord. They don't quite meet the top of the walls, leaving an open margin above the beams. Daylight slants through in thin, dusty spears. The breeze sneaks in as easily as it does through the door. If you stand on tiptoe, you can probably poke a finger into the straw and feel the winter air right there. Historians still argue whether Tudor people considered these loft spaces part of the home or part of the outdoors. Some evidence suggests children climbed into the thatch to hide small treasures or kittens. Others claim it was strictly forbidden because of vermin and collapse. Either way, the soundscape above you makes the decision for you. A faint scratching, a whispery rustle, something small and many-footed living its best life. Your guide grins when you glance up nervously. "Just sparrows," he says. "Or mice." You're not convinced. You think of the plague stories from history class and suddenly your scalp prickles. A quirky tidbit: archaeologists pulling down old cottages sometimes find whole mummified cats sealed into the thatch, deliberately placed there as protective charms. The belief was that the cat's spirit would scare off vermin or evil spirits. You wonder if somewhere above your head, a shriveled feline guardian still lies between layers of straw, unseen but working, 500 years later. You shift closer to the hearth for comfort, but even here you can feel stray bits of straw drifting down like confetti. They catch in your hair and smell faintly of smoke and haylofts. The roof, for all its warmth, is slowly shedding into the room. You imagine sweeping this floor only to find more yellow fragments the next day. The guide explains how the thatch is laid thickest at the ridge, sometimes 2 feet deep, and how it must be combed and patched every few years. If neglected, it goes green with moss and sprouts weeds, looking more like a garden than a roof. In summer, swallows dart in and out. In winter, the straw sags under frost. You can almost feel the damp pressing down, a cold blanket separating you from the sky. You close your eyes for a moment and picture lying upstairs in the loft at night. The straw mattress beneath you, the straw roof above you, the smell of smoke and grass blending into your dreams. Rain patters on the thatch, muted and soft, like someone drumming fingers on a pillow. It's oddly soothing. Then you remember the other sounds: a rat scratching, a bird fluttering, a spider sliding down its thread. Suddenly the charm breaks and you're awake again. One mainstream fact the guide mentions almost offhandedly: fire was an ever-present threat. Sparks from the open hearth could drift upward and smolder unseen in the thatch. Many villages had bylaws ordering chimneys to be built of brick if possible, or hearths to be damped at night. But out here, with clay and wood as your only materials, you relied on luck and vigilance. He gestures to a long pole leaning against the wall, a fire hook, used to pull burning thatch down before it spread. You imagine wielding it in a panic at 2 in the morning, coughing on smoke. Another little-known detail. People sometimes planted herbs such as pennyroyal or lavender in the thatch, believing the scent repelled insects and evil alike. You squint upward but can't see any green. It's midwinter and whatever was there has withered. Still, a faint herby smell lingers, or maybe you're imagining it because you want to. You ask softly how long the roof has been there. The guide shrugs. Since before my father's time, we patch it each summer. He says it the way you might talk about mowing the lawn, a chore, not a crisis. You think of your own roof back home lasting decades with no maintenance and feel a twinge of guilt. Historians still debate how much daylight the thatch actually blocked. Some argue the thick straw made Tudor interiors gloomy even at noon. Others note that loose weaving let light filter in like gold dust. As you watch the dim shafts flicker above the hearth, you find yourself siding with the gloom camp. This is a house that hugs its shadows. A straw fragment drifts down and lands on your sleeve. You brush it away and your fingers graze something else, a tiny beetle crawling near the bench. The guide doesn't even glance down. He's lived with them forever. You, on the other hand, are silently composing a 1-star review in your head. Joke number 1 for this section. If Airbnb had existed in Tudor England, the amenities list would read free wildlife. You lean back and try to see beauty in it instead. The roof is like a thatched nest, a living cap for a living house. Birds above, humans below, smoke rising between them like an offering. You think of modern green roofs planted with sedum and wonder if we've circled back to an old idea dressed as innovation. The guide, sensing your curiosity, tells you how children used to climb up and sit on the ridge during harvest festivals, waving ribbons or watching processions. The image is almost cinematic, a line of children silhouetted against the sky on a shaggy golden roof, giggling while drums beat in the street. You smile despite yourself. Another quirky bit. Some roofs doubled as storage. Farmers tucked extra bundles of herbs or even spare tools up into the eaves, secure from animals on the ground but not from mice above. You imagine reaching up for a bunch of dried onions and finding only gnawed strings. All the while the fire snaps below and your nose picks up another scent, a faint sourness. Maybe damp straw, maybe rodent droppings, maybe just your imagination playing tricks. You pull your cloak tighter and glance again at the door. Out there, frost whitens the ground. In here, you're wrapped in straw and smoke. You can't help making your second little joke. 5-star rustic vibe doesn't usually mean literal stars peeking through the roof, but here you might just get them. The guide chuckles when you say it. On a clear night, he says, we see the moonlight through the ridge. It's like sleeping under the sky. He pauses, then adds more seriously, but when it rains, you'll know it too. He gestures to a dark stain on the wall where water has run down from above. A pot sits beneath to catch drips. You imagine trying to sleep while water taps steadily into it. It's the Tudor version of a leaky faucet, only colder. Historians still argue whether the thatch contributed to health problems, fleas, damp lungs, fevers, or whether people simply adapted. Either way, you're already feeling a tickle in your throat from the combined smoke and straw dust. You cough quietly and the guide nods, as if to say, welcome to the club. Your third gentle joke surfaces unbidden. You start thinking of the roof as a kind of Tudor loft apartment, just without insulation, Wi-Fi, or pest control. In a weird way, it's true. The upper space of the house is the warmest in winter and the first to dry out in summer, so children often slept there. Imagine climbing a wooden ladder at night, ducking under low beams, and curling up under a blanket while the roof crackles with unseen life above you. You close your eyes and almost hear it. The whisper of straw shifting as a bird nests, the sigh of wind weaving through, the heartbeat of the house in its roof. For a moment you drift, half asleep, until another straw fragment lands on your cheek and brings you back. The guide rises, pokes the fire, and says quietly, "You'll want to see upstairs soon." You nod, but for now you're content to sit below, absorbing the layered smells and sounds of this living thatch. Above you, a centuries-old technique keeps out the worst of the weather while inviting in a microcosm of creatures. Below you, the hearth struggles to warm your fingers. You're somewhere between outdoors and indoors, between the modern world and a time when a roof was not a barrier but a compromise. And so you sit, wrapped in cloak and story, feeling the roof shed its tiny gifts into your hair, listening to the wind combing through straw just inches from your head, and realizing that in Tudor Britain, even the ceiling was a habitat, for you, for animals, for spirits, for history itself. You shuffle forward, still rubbing the chill from your fingers, and your toes sink slightly with each step. At first you think it's just because your shoes are soft, but no, the floor itself gives under your weight. In a Tudor house, most ground floors aren't wood at all. They're tamped earth, packed dirt mixed with ash, bits of straw, sometimes even animal hair. Someone might have scattered a layer of fresh green rushes or sedge across it this morning, but those stalks are already browning and flattening underfoot. You can smell them before you look down, a marshy sweetness, a hint of rot, and wait for it, the tang of something much less poetic. That's because rush strewing isn't just for decoration. It's an attempt at masking spills, crumbs, and bodily waste. Think of it as the Tudor version of a kitchen sponge, except you're walking on it. As you take another slow step, the room creaks with small life. A beetle scuttles across a worn patch where the earth has cracked. A mouse vanishes under the edge of the hearth. You're not the only one who finds the rushes comfortable. Modern museum displays often put down a token handful of reeds to show authentic flooring. But in real houses of the 1500s, the layer might be several inches deep and rarely changed. The French visitor Etienne Perlin, writing in the mid-16th century, complained that English rush floors hadn't been renewed for 20 years. Historians still argue whether he was exaggerating for effect or simply horrified at what he saw. Either way, you're now standing in it. When your heel presses harder, you feel a cool dampness wick through your shoe. That's because this ground isn't sealed. There's no moisture barrier. In winter, ground frost pushes up, and in summer the floor can sweat. People sometimes sprinkled dried herbs, lavender, mint, pennyroyal, into the rushes to combat the smell and supposedly keep insects at bay. Quirky tidbit: pennyroyal is actually a mild insecticide, but it's also toxic to humans. In other words, the Tudor air freshener under your feet doubled as a poison you probably wouldn't want to breathe too deeply. The irony makes you smile as you tiptoe like you're in a marsh. You crouch to get a closer look and realize how stratified the surface is. Fresh green stalks on top, older gray mats below, then compacted soil as dark as coffee grounds. Every layer holds crumbs, nail parings, chicken bones, and the stray bead from someone's sleeve. This is archaeology in real time. Later generations of builders would cover such floors with planks or bricks, but in the first half of the 1500s, especially outside the wealthy elite, you lived on Earth. Bringing in the outdoors had an entirely different meaning. Another step and you catch a smoky draft near the hearth, swirling tiny motes up into a sunbeam. That's dust from the rushes. You inhale it whether you want to or not. Chronic coughs described in Tudor letters aren't only from outdoor mists or indoor smoke. They're also from walking, eating, and sleeping above decomposing plant matter. In a way, you're breathing the floor. As you edge toward a corner, you glimpse a dog curled in a shallow scrape of bare earth. He's found the warmest spot. Animals belonged indoors as much as outdoors here, not as pampered pets but as working partners. Rat catchers, nighttime alarms, living heaters. Their droppings joined the mix underfoot. Nobody thought it strange. A Tudor household was a micro-ecosystem, and you're standing on its compost layer. You draw your cloak tighter and move into the next room, and the floor changes character again. Here the rushes are fresher, perhaps because this is where visitors are received. Someone has tried to impress you with a checkerboard scatter of darker sedge over pale straw. It's almost pretty, like a rustic carpet. But kneel down and you'll see the same issues. Damp, crumbs, tiny shells of insects that have molted. You wonder how anyone managed to keep their fine clothes clean. Answer: they didn't. That's why long gowns had removable hem guards called guards or foot sides. These strips took the worst of the dirt and could be replaced when they rotted. A practical hack from 500 years before Scotchgard. You shuffle toward the stairs and notice your feet making hardly a sound. That's one advantage. Rush floors are quiet. They muffle footsteps and voices. In a world without double glazing, without insulation, without privacy, those few inches of plant matter are your only acoustic shield. Parents could gossip while children slept. Lovers could whisper. The flip side. Vermin could scurry unheard until they were at your bread. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of plague-bearing fleas was truly higher in rural, rush-floored homes than in stone-flagged urban ones. But either way, you're scratching just thinking about it. Your guide, a servant in a woolen kirtle, grins at your expression. She picks up a small bundle from a peg, today's strewing herbs. Change M every fortnight if you can, she says. That's optimistic. Most households did it seasonally at best. Quirky tidbit, some places layered not only rushes but also scented wood chips or even crushed shells. The shells weren't for smell, they were for grit, to scrape the floor clean when swept. A Tudor vacuum cleaner of sorts. As you ascend a few wooden steps to the solar above, the earth gives way to boards. The difference is immediate. Your footfalls echo, the air is drier, and you feel a tiny thrill of modernity. Upstairs rooms in better houses sometimes had simple plank floors sprinkled with sand rather than rushes. The sand could be swept and replaced. It's not exactly parquet, but after the swampy ground floor it feels like luxury. You pause at the threshold, imagining the household below carrying rushes in and out with the seasons, shaking them to remove larger debris, cursing when mice scuttle out. This is housekeeping as battle. You also start to appreciate why shoes of the period were made as they were. Thin leather soles, easy to slip off. People often went barefoot indoors, or at least changed into slippers when they could, to spare their good shoes from the muck. Imagine stepping from a muddy street into an equally muddy hall. You'd want a second pair too. Those carved wooden patterns you've seen in museums, like little platforms, suddenly make sense. They're not fashion statements, they're survival gear for the indoor bog. Kneeling again, you press your palm to the earth downstairs one last time. It's cool, faintly pulsing with the life beneath. Worm tunnels, roots, the moisture of last night's rain creeping upward. It's easy to romanticize living close to nature. But here you feel the literal cost. Damp bones, stained garments, persistent coughs. This isn't a cottagecore fantasy. It's a breeding ground for illness, yet it's also home. Children learn to toddle on this surface. Dogs to sleep on it, rushes to rustle under secret footsteps. A log pops in the hearth and you straighten, brushing dirt from your knees. Already the smell of crushed herbs is clinging to your fingers, sharp and medicinal. You think about how future centuries would cover these floors with tiles, planks, carpets, then linoleum, each step sealing nature out a little more. But tonight you're firmly in the 1500s, grounded, literally, in a floor that breathes, sweats, and shelters tiny worlds unseen. You tiptoe back toward the stairs, feeling the springy mat yield under you, and realize with a faint smile that you'll never again look at a rustic, reed mat the same way. What you've walked on here isn't a quaint decoration. It's a living record of everyone and everything that's ever passed through the house. As you step onto the first stair and leave the earth floor behind, you hear it sigh under your weight like a soft warning. Remember me. The stairway you've just climbed ends at a gallery that feels drier, but as soon as you reach the top you're pulled back by the unmistakable smell of smoke. It's faint at first, like the lingering perfume of a candle snuffed out, but then a gust from the chimney pushes a whole ribbon of it across the ceiling. This is supposed to be the warmest part of the house, yet the air bites colder than you expected, and every breath tastes of soot. Welcome to the heart of a Tudor home's heat source, a hearth that works hard but never really wins. You shuffle closer to the fire instinctively. It's set into a low, wide opening lined with roughly fired brick. No grate, no tidy iron bars like you're used to seeing in period dramas, just a mound of logs and peat glowing red. The flames lick at the back wall and roll smoke upward toward a funnel-like hood. In theory, that hood leads into a chimney. In practice, the chimney, is little more than a smoke shelf hacked into the timber frame and plastered with clay. The result: the warm air heads up, the cold air rushes in, and you stay chilly no matter how close you stand. That is, if you're allowed to stand this close. In a real Tudor household, the fire isn't a gathering place for everyone. The lord or master sits nearest, children and servants further out, and the very edges of the hall are practically freezing. That social gradient matches the heat gradient, warmth equals status. You edge back a few steps and suddenly feel the temperature drop as though you've opened a fridge door. You pull your cloak tighter, and your breath fogs in the middle of the room, even while the logs hiss and pop. A mainstream fact: chimneys were still a novelty in many houses at the start of the 16th century. Plenty of smaller homes simply had a central hearth and a hole in the roof, which meant smoke filled the rafters before finding its way out. When Henry VII's Building Acts started encouraging more brick chimneys, people complained that the newfangled structures made them cough more. Historians still argue whether that was because chimneys actually increased smoke exposure by drawing it through the rooms differently, or whether it was simply a case of people noticing, for the first time, what they'd been breathing all along. You lean on a carved beam and feel a greasy residue on your palm. That's centuries of soot mixed with the oils from cooking meat. Above your head, the timber beams are black as coal. In some houses, the rafters became so impregnated with creosote they could smolder for hours before bursting into flame. One quirky tidbit: in the wealthier manors, householders sometimes raised pet jackdaws or pigeons in the upper rafters, believing the birds' presence deterred evil spirits from descending through the chimney. What the birds actually did was add droppings to the fire hazard. You edge around the hearth and discover another problem. This fire is smoky because of the fuel. England's forests were shrinking. So many households burned sea coal, a bituminous, sulfurous coal dug from coastal pits. It burns hot but dirty, spitting sparks and belching soot. Your eyes sting as a draft wafts a puff of it your way. Children grew up with red, weepy eyes not only from illness but from this constant irritation. In some towns, visitors remarked that locals smelled like coal smoke even in the marketplace. You cough, and it scratches your throat like ash. The cold keeps creeping back into your toes. You glance at the walls, plaster over lath, no insulation. Whatever heat the hearth gives off seeps straight out again. At night, the embers might be banked under ash to keep a glow until morning, but the temperature still drops. People slept under layers of wool, with hats on their heads, and often with another body in the bed to share warmth. You think of your own thermostat back home and chuckle at how low you set it. In a Tudor house, you'd be considered a pampered cat by comparison. The servant who guided you before appears at your elbow with a small basket of greenish logs. "Damp again," she mutters, laying them on the fire. Damp wood hisses and adds even more smoke, yet it's unavoidable when your fuel is stored in an unheated outbuilding. You watch as she pokes the embers with an iron rod. Sparks leap out and land on the rush mat near your feet, smoldering little red eyes. She stamps them quickly with her boot. Fire is a constant, low-level threat. Every Tudor knew at least one family who'd lost everything to it. There's also an odd sweetness in the air. You look closer at the hearth and see a pot hanging from an iron hook, simmering slowly. This is dinner pottage made of barley, root vegetables, and maybe a scrap of salted meat. Day after day, the pot stays on the hook, topped up as needed, until the flavor is a memory of every meal you've ever eaten. The smoky hearth is kitchen, heating system, and living room combined. Your stomach growls even as your lungs rebel. You retreat toward the far wall where a tapestry hangs. It looks warm and heavy, and indeed it blocks the draft a little. Wealthier houses line their walls with such hangings to trap heat. Poorer families may do with nothing. Even so, you can see your breath plume faintly against the fabric. Cold radiates up from the floor, sneaks down from the roof, and slithers through gaps in the window lattice. The hearth fights a losing battle. The medieval dream of a great fire warming a great hall is mostly just that, a dream. Yet people adapted. You remember reading that some households hung smoke boards under the ceiling beams to catch soot before it fell on the food. Others built benches with high backs to create a pocket of warmer air. Some even wore small wax plugs in their nostrils to keep out the stink. Quirky. Absolutely. Effective. Maybe a little. Historians still argue whether those hacks made much difference to long-term health. All you know is that you're still shivering despite the flames licking the logs. A log collapses, sending another gust of sparks up the flue. You step back and imagine the entire building from above. Cold outer walls, damp rush floors below, smoky hearth in the middle like a dark lung. Everything you felt so far, the earth underfoot, the pests above, now the weak warmth of the hearth blends into one impression. Survival, not comfort. You rub your arms and look toward the stairs leading up to the sleeping quarters. Maybe it will be warmer there, maybe. You cast one last glance at the fire. It's beautiful in a way, a glowing heart in a dim house. But as you turn to go, you realize you've been breathing shallowly for the past 10 minutes, instinctively avoiding a lungful of soot. Your eyes water, your clothes smell already of smoke, and a thin film of ash clings to your skin. This is heat without comfort, light without clarity, and it's only going to get colder when the night truly falls. You draw your cloak tighter, step away from the hearth, and head toward the narrow stair. Above, you can hear the creak of a bed frame and the faint rustle of someone settling under blankets. The warmth down here may be an illusion, but at least it's light. Upstairs the dark waits, and with it the drafts of a Tudor night. You climb the narrow stair and find yourself in a room that is, somehow, both darker and brighter than what you've just left. The hearth downstairs glows faintly through a hole in the floorboards, but up here the main illumination comes from the window, and it's nothing like the clean panes you're used to. You go over to it instinctively, reaching for daylight, and are met by a patchwork of leaded diamond shapes, each filled not with transparent glass but with something clouded and pale. You're looking through horn. This is what most people forget about Tudor windows. Real glass existed, but it was expensive. Ordinary homes used thin slices of polished animal horn or sheets of oiled cloth stretched on wooden frames. They let in a milky light, just enough to see shapes. As you press your nose closer, you can make out a crooked apple tree outside, its branches blurred like a watercolor painting. There's a faint, slightly rancid smell too, because horn windows are still organic material. When the sun warms them, they give off a whiff that you'd never mistake for fresh air. The latticework of lead or wood dividing the panes is thick, creating a spiderweb pattern that breaks the view into tiny diamonds. The effect is like looking at the world through a patchy kaleidoscope. Your modern eyes ache for a clear pane. You think of your own windows at home and their double glazing, the way they keep out drafts and noise. Here, the lattice actually helps support shutters, heavy wooden boards that close at night because the horn or cloth alone can't stop the cold or the wind. You run your fingers over the shutter's iron latch and feel a thin layer of frost. It's midday. Frost, inside at midday. A mainstream fact. In many Tudor houses, windows couldn't even be opened. The frames were fixed, and ventilation came from gaps elsewhere in the building. People assumed bad smells meant bad air that caused disease, but paradoxically, their houses trapped smoky, damp air precisely because they had so few ways to let it out. Historians still argue whether households actually believed the horn panes themselves filtered sickness. Some contemporary notes hint at it, or whether that's a modern misreading. Either way, you're standing in a dim, chilly chamber breathing in yesterday's stew fumes and coal smoke. You reach out and tap one of the horn squares. It flexes slightly, soft rather than brittle. A quirky tidbit. In very poor homes, instead of horn, they sometimes used bladder, yes, animal bladder, dried and stretched. Imagine the view through that on a rainy day. In a few rare places, people coated thin linen with linseed oil until it became translucent, like primitive wax paper. All of these materials yellow with age, turning rooms into perpetual late afternoon. As you step back, you notice how the dimness shapes everything. Textiles look muted. Carved furniture loses its crisp detail. Faces vanish into shadow even when they're only a few feet away. It's a house built for touch and memory rather than sight. People knew by feel where things were. Children memorized the location of steps and benches. You bump your shin on a stool and mutter under your breath. A Tudor child would have sidestepped it automatically. There's a draft, though, always a draft. The lead cames holding the panes warp over time, leaving hairline gaps. Wind whistles through and lifts the rushes on the floor like hair rising on an arm. You wrap your cloak closer. Downstairs you were breathing smoke. Up here you're breathing cold. Both, in their own ways, are unhealthy. You think about how often colds and lung complaints appear in parish records. Maybe the climate wasn't the only culprit. You also start to notice how light itself was managed. With windows so dim, interior colors had to be bold. Red-dyed hangings, blue cushions, whitewashed plaster. Candlelight would have been the main evening illumination. But candles were costly. Many households made do with rushlights, strips of dried rush dipped in animal fat. They smoked, sputtered, and stank. One quirky note you recall. Some people believed beeswax candles burned with a pure light that evil spirits disliked, while tallow candles attracted them. So your choice of candle might double as a charm. You pull the shutter half closed and the room drops into deeper shadow. This is what evening would feel like even in early afternoon on a cloudy day. People's daily rhythms bent around it. Work began at dawn, stopped at dusk, and inside chores were planned by available light. Reading and fine sewing were difficult unless you sat right at the window. In wealthier homes, glazed windows of broad glass started appearing, but even that glass was often greenish and wavy, distorting everything beyond. Historians still argue about how these dim interiors shape behavior. Did people simply accept a twilight world, or did it influence mood, patience, even imagination? You feel your own mind slowing, your voice dropping as though the room itself demands hush. The horn panes glow faintly like skin lit from behind, and outside the apple tree blurs in a gust of wind. A muffled noise startles you, a clatter from somewhere beyond the wall. Without clear sightlines, sound rules the space. You picture servants moving about on the landing, children whispering behind hangings, a dog pawing at the rushes. Privacy here isn't visual, it's auditory. The window hides the outside world but also hides you from it, making the room feel like a sealed box of cold breath and muted shapes. You run your palm along the sill and come away with damp fingers. Condensation collects and freezes here in winter. In some households, ice would lace the inside of the panes like fern patterns. You imagine waking up to scrape frost off your window from the inside. The very idea makes you shiver. You probably wouldn't last a day, you think, and you're only halfway through it. Down below, the hearth crackles. Up here, the window sighs as the wind presses against it. You're caught between smoke and frost, between a world blurred by horn and one distorted by lead lattice. The Tudor home, for all its charm and miniature paintings, is not built for comfort but for getting by. You press your forehead lightly to the pane and watch your breath bloom against it like a ghostly handprint. For a moment you wonder how anyone managed to dream big in rooms so dim. And yet somehow they did. Plays were written, songs sung, children raised. The dim light made colors more precious, the cold made warmth sweeter, and the blurry view perhaps allowed imaginations to fill in what eyes could not. You pull back from the window, rubbing your hands for warmth, and turn toward the corner where a bedstead waits under heavy curtains. Maybe a nap will help. You're starting to feel the weight of this day. You draw the curtain aside and step into a world that's somehow even closer, softer, and yet more uncomfortable than anything you've felt so far. This is the sleeping space, and it looks inviting at first glance, a carved wooden frame, a heap of blankets, and a heavy canopy overhead. But the moment you sit down on the edge of the mattress, you feel it. A damp springiness, a faint crunch, and the unmistakable whiff of something that once grew in a field. Welcome to your Tudor bed. It isn't a mattress as you know it. Instead, you're perched on a palliasse, a large sack stuffed with straw, reeds, or sometimes chaff, whatever was cheap and dry when the seasons turned. The stuffing flattens and shifts under your weight. It creaks like walking on old paper. The dampness you feel isn't a spill, it's the house itself. Moisture seeps up from the earth below and drifts down from the horn-windowed walls above. Even upstairs, nothing ever quite dries out. You shift, and a puff of fine dust rises from the seams, catching the faint window light like a miniature galaxy. You realize you're inhaling the bed. A mainstream fact: in Tudor households, beds were prized possessions, often listed in wills. They weren't just for sleeping, they were symbols of status, sometimes the most valuable thing a family owned. But even a good bed in the 16th century wouldn't meet your idea of comfort. Feather mattresses existed but were rare, and most people lay on straw. Families would shake up or beat the palliasse to fluff it, but that just redistributed whatever had settled inside. You run your hand along the blanket. It's wool, heavy and scratchy. Under that is a sheet of linen if you're lucky, but linen's expensive and often coarse. You lift the edge and see the ropes crisscrossing beneath, tied to the bed frame. They sag under the weight of the mattress. This is where the phrase "sleep tight" supposedly comes from, tightening the ropes for a firmer surface. Historians still argue whether that etymology is real or a charming myth, but you can see why it persists. As you press a hand to one of the ropes, you feel how slack it's become. The whole bed sways slightly like a hammock. You swing your legs up and lie back. The canopy above isn't just decorative, it's a practical shield against falling dust, bugs, and cold drafts. Curtains can be pulled to make a little cocoon of warmth, or at least a warmer pocket of cold. But this cocoon isn't private. In many homes, several people share the same bed. Children with parents, apprentices with each other, travelers with strangers at inns. Quirky tidbit: some wealthy households even had truckle beds, low pull-out beds where servants slept beneath their masters, literally underfoot. As you settle in, you notice movement in the corner of your eye. A tiny black speck scurries across the sheet and disappears into a seam. Yes, it's exactly what you fear. The Tudor bed is a haven for lice, fleas, and mites. The warmth of bodies, the softness of straw, and the infrequency of laundering make perfect conditions. People sprinkled herbs like lavender or pennyroyal between sheets to deter pests, but the results were mixed. You scratch your arm automatically and then laugh at yourself. You probably wouldn't last a night, let alone a day. The cold still seeps in around your shoulders. Even with a heavy wool blanket and a canopy, the air is frigid. People often slept fully clothed, hats on, sometimes even with boots nearby for quick escapes to the privy. You pull the blanket up and realize how heavy it is, pressing down on you like a weight. Comfort through compression, Tudor style. It smells of smoke from the hearth below and of the natural lanolin left in the wool. Not unpleasant, but unmistakably animal. Your mind drifts to privacy. With multiple people in the same room and sometimes in the same bed, bedtime here isn't solitary. Whispered prayers, muttered dreams, the occasional cough, it's all part of the night soundtrack. Thin walls transmit everything. The wooden floor creaks as someone walks by outside. Downstairs, the fire pops. Sleep here is communal and porous. Your senses never fully switch off. You push the curtain back for a moment and peer into the dim room. There are other bed frames, smaller ones, a cradle. You imagine a whole family tucking in, the older children on pallets of straw near the wall, the baby in the cradle, the dog curling at someone's feet. The air is damp with breath, warm near faces but icy at the edges. No wonder people told ghost stories. In the flickering rushlight, shapes move, shadows breathe. Historians still argue about sleep patterns in pre-modern Europe. Some evidence suggests people slept in two phases, a first sleep after dusk, then waking for a while to talk, pray, or even work before a second sleep till dawn. In a room like this, you can believe it. Waking in the dark, you'd hear mice in the rushes, feel the chill, and perhaps whisper to your bedmate until drowsiness returned. You lie back again, listening. The ropes creak under you, the straw sighs. Somewhere a flea jumps. You think about how central this bed is to daily life, not just for sleep, but for giving birth, nursing the sick, even dying. In a world without hospitals, the bed is the stage for every major event. And yet it's a simple sack of straw on ropes, hidden behind curtains to hold in what little warmth you can muster. The canopy above glows faintly from the window's milk light. You trace a pattern in the fabric and feel a lump beneath your shoulder, probably a straw stalk poking through. People sometimes layered two mattresses, a softer feather bed atop a straw base, but even then you'd still feel the occasional jab. You roll over and the whole structure sways again. A sleep tight, rope tightening sounds like a very good idea. Your eyelids grow heavy despite the cold. The weight of the blanket, the muted sounds, the dimness, it's soporific in its own way. You can see how people might drift off here, sharing warmth, sharing stories, wrapped in smoke and wool. But you also know your modern back would protest by morning, your modern skin crawl at the bites. You're a visitor, not a resident. This bed would break you before it welcomed you. You slip back out, letting the curtain fall. The rushes on the floor whisper under your feet. In a few hours, when the household truly sleeps, this room will be full of breathing bodies, tiny scratching sounds, and the occasional mutter of a dream. For now, it's a still snapshot of Tudor night. Heavy cloth, damp air, shared space. You shiver, tug your cloak tight, and head for the door. Daylight is fading, and there's still more of the house to see before darkness claims it completely. You edge out of the bedchamber, ducking your head under the low beam and into a narrower corridor. The timber creaks under your step, and a draft snakes up from somewhere below. Following the sound of dripping water, you push open a small, crooked door. The smell that hits you is unmistakable. Sour, earthy, faintly sweet and acrid all at once. Welcome to the washing place. This is where you're supposed to get clean in a Tudor household if you dare. What you see would make your modern shower head recoil. There's no tiled cubicle, no steaming hot spray. Instead, in the corner stands a wooden tub, wide and squat, its hoops of iron streaked with rust. A bucket sits beside it, and another is perched on a stool with a ragged cloth thrown over it. A jug of cold well water leans precariously on the sill. This is the bath. It's used rarely, and only when there's time and fuel to heat water over the hearth. The rest of the time, washing means a quick wipe with a damp cloth or simply changing your linen. A mainstream historical fact. Tudor people did bathe, but not every day and rarely as full immersions. Water was believed to open the pores and let in disease. So many preferred dry washing, rubbing with cloths, herbs, or perfumes, and relied on frequent changes of shirts or smocks to absorb sweat. Queen Elizabeth I reportedly owned hundreds of linen shifts, changing them daily, which for her rank counted as cleanliness. You crouch and peer into the tub. The wood is stained from years of use. A faint smell of herbs rises. Someone has scattered rosemary or lavender in the water to make it more pleasant, or to mask something less pleasant. Quirky tidbit. Some households added beer or wine to bath water, believing the alcohol would purify or strengthen the bather. You imagine sliding into a tepid brew of ale and herbs and suppress a shudder. The warmth would last only minutes before the cold of the room seeped back in. A shelf on the wall holds a lump of coarse soap, more like waxy cheese than the bars you know, and a stiff brush. There's also a comb carved from bone, its teeth clogged with something you'd rather not identify. On a peg hangs a long linen towel, gray with use. You run your fingers over it. It's rough enough to double as sandpaper. Even drying off here would feel like a punishment. You glance around for a window. There's only a horn panel, dull and opaque. Light seeps through, but the air is clammy. Your breath fogs. The floor under your boots is damp rushes. They squish when you step. There's a bucket in the corner with a lid. You don't open it. In some homes, especially in towns, the washing room doubled as a place to empty chamber pots before someone carried them out. Clean and unclean shared space in uneasy truce. Historians still argue whether the average Tudor was truly dirtier than people in later centuries. Some evidence suggests that while full-body bathing was rare, hand and face washing were common, and linen acted as a filter against grime. But standing here in this dim, dripping room, you can feel why modern people imagine a perpetual stench. It's not just the water, it's the closeness of everything, the constant damp, the shared facilities. You dip your hand into the bucket of water by the tub. It's shockingly cold, biting into your skin like a winter stream. This is what you'd pour over yourself to rinse. No wonder many simply dabbed at their face and called it done. In the colder months, You might warm a small basin near the fire and sponge yourself. Full immersion was a luxury and a risk. People associated hot baths with weakness, even immorality. Public bathhouses had existed in medieval England, but by the Tudor period, many were closed or condemned, partly because they were linked to brothels and partly out of fear of disease. A scratchy noise draws your eyes to the ceiling. There's movement between the beams, maybe mice, maybe something larger. Even here, pests are constant companions. Herbs on the floor might deter them, but only a little. You think back to the lavender on the bed and realize it wasn't just for scent, it's also a repellent. On a stool sits a small bowl with a shaving razor, a straight blade with a wooden handle, and a bit of tallow. Someone been scraping a chin here. You picture a father sitting while his wife pours water over him, children peeking in. Privacy is minimal. Modesty is managed by turns, not by walls. In wealthier households, servants might haul buckets of heated water to a private chamber for their master. In poorer ones, everyone used the same tub in sequence, oldest to youngest, dirtiest last. The phrase, "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," makes sudden, visceral sense. You take a step closer to the tub and catch your reflection in the water. The surface trembles, distorting your face. You imagine lowering yourself into it, cloth on a hook ready to scrub. The shock of cold would make you gasp. You'd wash quickly, shivering, then rub yourself with that scratchy towel. Cleanliness would be relative, less sweat, more goose flesh. On the wall hangs a small mirror of polished metal. It's warped and spotted. You lean in. Your breath clouds it instantly. Grooming here is an act of approximation. Combs, pins, a dab of rose water if you're fancy, but no toothbrush. People clean their teeth with twigs, cloth, or powders made of charcoal or crushed shells. You touch your own teeth reflexively and thank your dentist. The smell of the room thickens as you linger. Smoke from the hearth seeps up through cracks, mingling with damp wood, herbs, and human scent. It's not overwhelming, but it's persistent. This is the smell of living close to the earth, with limited water and endless company. It clings to fabric, hair, skin. You realize you've been holding your breath. You step back toward the door, careful of the wet floor. Behind you, the tub waits, half full of gray water. In a few hours, someone will carry it outside and dump it, maybe in a drain, maybe just on the ground. Waste and water mingle easily here. Yet for the people who live in this house, this room is a place of renewal, a chance to feel fresh, to change linen, to scrub at least the visible parts of themselves. As you close the door, the sound of dripping fades. You rub your palms together, trying to warm them. You can almost feel the rough linen towel on your skin, smell the herbal bath, hear the chatter of a family taking turns. It's a far cry from your hot shower and scented soap. You're beginning to suspect the title of tonight's journey was right. You probably wouldn't last a day. The staircase narrows again and tips you toward a door that feels heavier than the others. The hinges squeal as you push it open, and a gust of cooler air slides over your face. You're standing at the edge of the kitchen hearth space, the heart of any Tudor home. Here, everything to do with food and drink takes place. The cooking, the brewing, the currying, the storing. It smells like smoke and meat and yeast all at once, an almost medieval open-plan kitchen with none of the gleaming tiles you know. Your feet crunch on a scatter of ashes near the hearth. A fire still glows at the center, with a blackened iron pot suspended from a hook. Around it are wooden trenchers, a mortar and pestle, baskets of onions, a crock of butter slowly turning rancid, and a couple of earthenware jugs stoppered with cloth. This is your larder, pantry, and kitchen rolled into one. There's no refrigeration here. Everything that can be smoked, salted, pickled, or dried has been. Everything else is eaten quickly or fed to the pigs. A mainstream historical fact. Most Tudor households ate a diet heavy in bread, pottage, a thick stew of grains and vegetables, and ale. Meat was commoner than in the medieval period, but still not an everyday item for the poor. Ale, however, was universal. The water supply was often contaminated, so people drank small ale, low in alcohol but safer than water morning, noon, and night. Even children drank it. The barrels you see against the wall aren't for parties. They're your daily hydration. You run a finger along the rim of one jug. It's sticky. Someone been brewing. Quirky tidbit. In some households, women managed the small-scale brewing and became known as alewives, wearing tall, pointed hats so customers could spot them in a crowd, a detail that later fed into the iconography of witches. You glance at the soot-blackened rafters and half expect a broomstick to appear. A bench by the window holds a pile of herbs drying in bunches: rosemary, sage, marjoram. They're for cooking and for warding off pests. The window itself is covered with oiled cloth instead of glass, letting in light but not a clear view. Outside you hear a chicken cluck. A cat slinks by your ankles, eyes reflecting firelight. It's both mouser and pet. You give it a tentative scratch and it purrs like a tiny engine. Historians still argue whether Tudor food was actually healthier than modern diets. On one hand, it was largely unprocessed and seasonal. On the other, it lacked variety for the poor and relied on preservation methods that could taint or oversalt the food. Standing here, you can imagine the endless repetition of bread, broth, and ale. Without modern refrigeration, a bad batch could mean stomach cramps or worse. You crouch by the hearth and peer into the pot. Steam rises, smelling of leeks and barley. A long wooden spoon rests nearby, its handle polished by years of use. The fire's smoke curls upward and out through a louver in the roof. Your eyes water. There's no chimney as you know it, only a hole for the smoke to find. You can taste it on your tongue. This is the kitchen's perfume, a mix of wood smoke, boiling grain, and faint animal fat. It clings to everything, including you. On a trestle table lies a round of cheese covered with a cloth. A knife beside it has a wooden handle darkened by grease. Next to that sits a jar of honey, crystallized at the edges. You imagine breakfast here: bread torn by hand, a smear of butter or dripping, maybe a wedge of cheese, and a mug of ale. No coffee, no tea, those are exotic novelties still making their way to England. Mornings here smell of yeast and smoke, not espresso. In the corner you notice a tall barrel with a wooden spigot. A small ladder leans against it. This is where the small ale rests, fermenting gently. It's warm by the fire, not cool. You imagine drawing a mug, the liquid cloudy but refreshing. Safer than the water in the well, though still capable of giving you a headache if the batch has soured. You move to a side door that leads to a cool storage space dug slightly into the earth. The temperature drops a few degrees. Hooks on the ceiling hold smoked hams, their skins leathery. Strings of onions and garlic sway gently. On a shelf sit jars of pickled cabbage and salted fish, sealed with wax. This is winter's insurance policy. Without it, hunger waits just outside the door. You breathe in and catch a whiff of vinegar, salt, and earth. A scratching noise draws your attention to a sack in the corner. You poke it and a mouse darts out, vanishing behind a barrel. The cat perks up. This is why herbs hang from the rafters and why the cat is tolerated. Pests are part of the kitchen ecology. You picture yourself eating here and feel the tiny thrill of risk. A stray hair in your pottage, a weevil in your bread, a mouthful of ale too sour to swallow. The heat from the hearth seeps into your clothes. Even with the door open, the air is thick. In summer, this would be almost unbearable. In winter, it's a blessing. People lived by the fire, cooked by it, and gathered stories around it. It was social glue as much as a heat source. You can hear faint laughter from another room. This is where family life happens. On a small stool sits a wooden trencher with a lump of salt. It's coarse and gray, nothing like your neat shaker. Salt is precious, mined or evaporated, taxed and traded. To sit above the salt at table meant you were of higher status. You run a fingertip over it, it's damp and gritty. Even seasoning here is tactile. You picture breakfast again, or supper. Everyone sitting on benches, dipping bread into a communal pot, wiping hands on their clothes. No forks yet, just knives, spoons, and fingers. Plates are wood, sometimes stale bread used as a plate and then eaten. Shared drinking vessels pass from person to person. This is eating as communal survival, not private indulgence. Historians still argue about the actual caloric intake of different classes. Some data from household accounts suggests even laborers consumed enormous amounts of bread and ale, while the wealthy gorged on meat and sugar. But whatever the numbers, you feel in your bones how food here is work. Growing it, preserving it, cooking it, carrying it. Every bite has a backstory of toil. The cat winds between your legs again, tail high. The fire pops. You imagine yourself spending an entire day in this kitchen, chopping, stirring, tasting, stoking, brewing, and realize how foreign your own kitchen habits would seem here. No plastic, no hum of a refrigerator, no quick microwave fix. Everything smells alive, fermenting, smoking, drying. Everything takes time. You take one last look around. The rafters are black with soot. Herbs dangle like green chandeliers. The cat yawns, showing sharp little teeth. Outside the window, dusk deepens. The barrels, the baskets, the hanging meats all feel like props in a play whose script you barely know. But to the people who live here, this is security. Food for tomorrow, drink for today, warmth for the night. You step back toward the door, brushing ash from your sleeve. Your stomach growls at the smell of the pottage, but you're not sure you dare drink the ale. You're a visitor, peeking into survival. And as you close the door behind you, the kitchen exhales a puff of warm, yeasty air, the Tudor equivalent of hospitality. You follow a narrow corridor away from the warmth of the kitchen. The air cools, smells shift. Smoke and yeast give way to something sharper, more sour. Ahead, a crooked stair leads down to a low-ceilinged annex, half below ground. This is where the refuse of the house goes, and where you'll find what passes for plumbing. Welcome to the underbelly of a Tudor home, a place most visitors try not to think about, but everyone has to use. Your boots squelch on damp earth. A faint trickle of water runs somewhere beneath your feet. You push open a rough plank door and find yourself looking at a wooden bench with two round holes cut into it. Below is a pit you can't quite see but can definitely smell. This is the privy. If you're lucky, it's outside the main living space. If you're not, it's attached to the house, maybe even tucked into a corner of the stairwell. A mainstream historical fact. Indoor plumbing as you know it didn't exist in Tudor England except at a few royal palaces. Henry VII's Hampton Court, for example, had a network of conduits and guardrobes flushed with running water from a nearby stream. But ordinary people relied on simple pit latrines, chamber pots, or jakes. The contents were periodically emptied by gong farmers, a real job, and not a pleasant one, who hauled the waste away at night. You step closer. The wooden bench is stained and splintered. There's a small heap of straw nearby for wiping, and a bucket of ash to sprinkle over the pit to reduce smell. You imagine lowering yourself onto that hole on a winter's night, the cold air rising up to meet you, and shudder. In a world without paper rolls, cleanliness is a matter of ingenuity and endurance. Quirky tidbit. Some privies doubled as informal gossip hubs. In larger households, two holes might be cut side by side so people could relieve themselves together and chat, a kind of unintentional social network. You picture yourself sitting here next to a neighbor and have to stifle a nervous laugh. So much for privacy. Historians still argue how effective Tudor sanitation really was. In towns, open drains ran down the middle of streets, carrying waste toward rivers. Some scholars say the constant flow and organic matter created a surprisingly balanced microecosystem. Others see it as a breeding ground for disease. Standing in this damp chamber with the smell thick in your nose, you put your money on breeding ground. You glance at a small window high on the wall. It's just a slit, letting in a blade of gray light. Flies buzz lazily near it. On the ledge sits a cracked earthenware pot of dried herbs, maybe mint or rue, meant to mask odors. It's fighting a losing battle. The stench isn't overpowering, but it's persistent, a low background note you can't escape. You imagine the smell drifting up into the rooms above and understand why people hung sweet-smelling herbs everywhere else. A chamber pot sits under a stool nearby. This is the nighttime convenience for anyone who can't face the cold walk to the privy. In the morning, someone carries it out and dumps it in the pit or into the street gutter. Waste disposal is a daily, intimate chore. You lift the lid and set it back down quickly. Even the cat, who followed you this far, stays at the threshold, tail twitching. You run your hand along the wall. It's damp stone, rough and cold. Water seeps through from the outside. In heavy rains, privies can overflow and pits can collapse. Some households built theirs over running streams to flush waste away, but then the stream is fouled for everyone downstream. It's a closed loop you can taste on your tongue. The ash bucket catches your eye again. People sometimes added lime as well, hopping to sweeten the pit and hasten decomposition. It helps a little, but every few weeks the pit still fills and someone has to climb down with a bucket and shovel. You picture the gong farmer at work in the dark, up to his knees, and your stomach turns. There's no glamour here, only necessity. You shift your weight and the floor gives a little. It's not stone everywhere, parts are just packed earth covered in rushes. The rushes are damp, flattened, faintly greasy. You remember the rushes in the hall and wonder how many times your feet have carried traces of this place back upstairs. Hand washing is perfunctory at best. No wonder Tudor people douse themselves in perfume and herbs. Yet even here, life goes on. Someone has tacked a scrap of cloth over the bench for a bit of softness. A small wooden toy sits on a shelf, forgotten by a child. The human need to make even unpleasant spaces bearable is universal. You can see the faint scratches of initials carved into the wood, a bored visitor's legacy, perhaps centuries old. Historians still argue about the exact link between these sanitation practices and the great outbreaks of disease. The bubonic plague, for instance, was spread primarily by fleas, not filth directly, but the crowded, unhygienic conditions of Tudor towns made it easier for fleas and rats to thrive. Standing here, you can feel how thin the barrier between daily life and contagion really was. A gust of cooler air drifts through the window slit. You breathe it in gratefully, even if it's tinged with the same smell. Outside, you hear the faint rumble of a cart. Maybe it's the night soil man on his rounds. Waste removal is invisible in your world. Here, it's a profession. You take one last look at the privy. The bench, the hole, the ash, the flies. It's a simple technology that worked just well enough to keep households functioning. And yet it's also a reminder that in Tudor Britain, nothing is ever truly private or truly clean. Even your most intimate moments are communal, your refuse part of a wider economy. You step back into the corridor, pulling the door closed. The cat darts past your ankles and disappears up the stairs. You follow, breathing through your mouth until the smell fades. As you climb, you can't help thinking about your own bathroom at home, the tiles, the flush, the hot water, the door that locks. Here, those things would seem like sorcery. You emerge into a slightly warmer hall. The smell of wood smoke and herbs returns, a relief after the privy's air. But some part of it clings to you in your clothes, your hair, your imagination. You realize that in Tudor Britain you wouldn't just endure these conditions for a day. You'd carry them with you, literally, wherever you went. You leave the privy behind and climb back up the stair, lungs expanding gratefully as the fresher air of the hall fills them. You're beginning to understand the rhythm of this house now. Warm and smoky at its heart, damp at its edges, dark corners where pests or smells collect. Ahead at the far end of the passage is a heavy door with a metal latch. A draft trickles under it. You lift the latch, push, and step out into the small yard. The light seems brighter after the gloom. The smells change too. Straw, mud, animal warmth. This is the working yard, the Tudor utility room under open sky. Your boots sink slightly into packed earth mixed with manure. A chicken clucks near your feet and flutters off. In one corner, a pig snorts softly, rooting in a trough. A low lean-to of timber and wattle houses a few goats or sheep. Against the far wall are piles of split logs, baskets of kindling, a heap of ash from the hearth. You've stepped into the backstage of the house, where the daily support systems live. A mainstream historical fact. Even in towns, many Tudor households kept some livestock, chickens for eggs, pigs for scraps, sometimes a cow for milk. Animals weren't separate from human life. They were woven into it. Their waste fertilized gardens, their bodies provided food, their noises filled the dawn. The yard you're standing in is as essential as the kitchen or hall. A cat darts past, chasing a rat that makes the mistake of crossing open ground. It vanishes into a woodpile. You think of the herbs inside, the constant fight against pests, and realize this is part of the same ecosystem. Nothing is sealed off. Food scraps from the kitchen come out to the pigs. Rushes from the floor become bedding for animals. Manure goes to the garden or is just piled in a corner until someone carts it away. Near the door sits a wooden barrel half filled with rainwater. A gourd ladle floats on the surface. This is the household's tap for quick rinsing or filling pails. You scoop a little and splash your hands. The water is icy, with a faint green sheen of algae. Quirky tidbit. Some Tudors believed rainwater collected from certain roofs was softer and better for washing hair or fine fabrics, so people went to odd lengths to gather it from preferred spots. Historians still argue how rural, even urban households were in practice. Archaeological digs in city backyards show pens, pits, and middens full of animal bones and garden soil, suggesting that the line between town and country living was blurred. Standing here, hemmed in by timber walls yet surrounded by clucking and snorting, you can feel that blur. You edge around a pile of straw and come to a small garden plot. It's a rectangle of dark soil, damp from last night's rain. Stubs of cabbages and leeks poke up, herbs line the edges. This is no ornamental display but a kitchen garden, essential for flavoring and medicine. You bend and crush a sprig of thyme between your fingers. Its scent is sharp, almost medicinal. A few yards away sits a beehive woven from straw, humming with life. Honey is precious, sweetener, preservative, and wound dressing all in one. The pig eyes you warily, then goes back to rooting. You notice a wooden bucket nearby filled with kitchen scraps, potato peels, stale bread, bones. Nothing goes to waste. In winter, the pig will be slaughtered and every part used, from trotters to intestines. Even the blood becomes pudding. You swallow, thinking of your supermarket packets, and realize how direct Tudor life is about the cycle of eating. In a shaded corner stands a small shed with a low door. You stoop and peek inside. Hooks hang from the rafters, some holding smoked fish or strips of drying meat. A pile of tan hides is stacked in one corner. The air smells of salt, fat, and wood smoke. This is storage but also workspace, a place to cure, mend, sharpen. A grindstone leans against the wall. A small anvil sits on a block. Domestic life here is a continuous flow of maintenance. A rooster crows suddenly, making you jump. The sound bounces off the walls, loud as a trumpet. You imagine dawn here, the yard a chorus of clucks, grunts, bleats, and human footsteps. Sleep, you realize, is always a negotiation in a Tudor household. Even if you escape the lice in the bed, you'll wake to the animals outside. You move toward the woodpile. The logs are split but still damp. Firewood is precious. Gathering it takes time or money. A servant might spend hours each week just hauling and chopping fuel. Without it, the hearth goes cold and cooking stops. You run a hand over the rough bark and feel how heavy each log is. Heating water for a bath, you realize, isn't just about having a tub, it's about having the fuel to warm it. A small boy appears at the far gate carrying a basket of eggs. He glances at you and then vanishes inside. You catch a whiff of his passing, smoke, sweat, straw. For him, this yard is normal chores before breakfast, animals at his feet, manure under his nails. For you, it's a tableau of survival. Historians still argue about how dirty these spaces were. Manure and mud certainly mixed underfoot, but they also fertilized gardens, and animals were often healthier than in later industrial settings. Your nose tells you one thing, your head tells you another. It's messy but integrated, not yet industrial filth. The sky above is a pale wash of blue. A thin breeze carries the smell of the nearby river, brackish, faintly fishy. Somewhere a bell tolls. You stand in the yard, surrounded by the microcosm of a Tudor household. Animals, fuel, water, waste, herbs. Every sense engaged, no compartment truly sealed. You realize that if you stayed here for a day, you wouldn't just visit the yard, you'd work in it. Feeding pigs, hauling water, chopping wood, gathering eggs. Housework isn't a few indoor chores, it's outdoor labor too. This is the unseen backbone of the warm hall and the pottage pot. A chicken pecks near your boot. You step back toward the door, careful not to spook it. The yard feels both alive and precarious, a balance of food and filth, security and risk. As you lift the latch and go inside, the smells of straw and manure follow you in, mingling with the rushes on the floor. You pull the door closed and hear the animals settling behind you. Inside, the house seems almost quiet after the yard's chatter. But you know now that every warm bite, every mug of ale, every flicker of firelight is paid for in labor out back. You brush a bit of straw from your sleeve and head toward the next door, senses still full of the open air. You shuffle back into the dim passageway, straw still clinging to your shoes. The sound of the yard dies down behind the door, but a different noise rises ahead, a muffled rushing like distant surf. You follow it, passing the buttery and the pantry until another door appears. This one is thicker, warped from damp, with a faint smell of rot seeping through. When you push it open, a cool draft strokes your cheeks. You've reached the edge of the property where the household's lifeblood comes in, the water. The room is low-ceilinged, stone-floored, and darker than the others. In the corner, a wooden trough collects a steady trickle from a lead pipe that pierces the wall. The water is cloudy, faintly brown. This is the house's fresh supply, maybe from a nearby conduit or cistern, maybe just the public pipe. You dip your fingers, it's icy and smells faintly of iron. A wooden ladle hangs from a peg, crusted with scale. You think about your kitchen faucet back home and shiver. Mainstream fact first. In most Tudor towns, water didn't gush magically indoors. People fetched it from street conduits, pumps, or the nearest stream. Even wealthy houses with a pipe supply couldn't guarantee purity. The lead pipes, shared cisterns, and open channels invited contamination. Typhus, dysentery, and cholera had no names yet but moved quietly through communities. The tap in front of you is a luxury, but no guarantee of safety. Small window looks out onto a lane. You can see a gutter running down the middle, a sluggish gray flow of waste and rain. Children splash through it barefoot. This is the city's other water system, the one carrying refuse away. Except it doesn't really go away. It seeps into wells, into soil, into lives. Historians still argue whether Tudor people understood this connection. Some ordinances suggest they did, banning latrines near wells. Other evidence shows casual dumping continued for centuries. Beside the trough stands a row of wooden buckets, some stained dark inside. A maid kneels, filling one, then hoists it to her shoulder with a grunt and disappears. Hauling water is constant. Every mug of ale, every pot of pottage, every hand washed starts with a back bent under a pail. The romance of quaint old times starts to feel heavier. Quirky tidbit. A few households swore by holy well water drawn from springs blessed by saints for washing delicate linens or brewing special ale. Pilgrims carried bottles of it home, believing it curative. In a pinch, people might travel miles for better water, much as we buy bottled mineral water now. You glance at the cloudy trickle and think you'd do the same. A narrow stair leads down from this room, slick with moss. You descend cautiously. The rushing sound grows louder, the air colder. At the bottom is an arched tunnel lined with stone. A shallow channel runs along one side, glinting in the torchlight. This is the house's drain, part of a network of runnels that lead to the river. It smells of damp earth and something sour. Rats skitter out of sight. You imagine what happens during heavy rain, when the river rises and these drains backflow, bringing filth up instead of down. You crouch and trail a finger along the stone. It's slimy. This is the unseen underbelly of Tudor living, the water that comes, the water that goes, and everything that mingles between. Upstairs, you drank ale because it was safer than this. Down here, you see why. Historians still argue about the extent of lead poisoning in this era. Pipes, tankards, cooking pots, lead was everywhere. Some claim it dulled minds or worsened gout among the wealthy. Others think the exposure was too low to matter. You look at the dull gray pipe feeding the trough and imagine a slow, invisible toxin, drop by drop, winding through your body. You head back up into the light. The maid has returned, wiping her hands on an apron. She glances at you as if to say, "Are you done gawking?" and goes back to work. For her, this isn't a curiosity, it's a routine chore repeated morning to night. You wonder how many trips she makes in a day, how many gallons her shoulders bear. Above the trough hangs a row of cloth filters, stained brown. Someone at least tries to strain the worst bits out. You pick one up, it's rough, almost like burlap. A few rosemary sprigs lie on a shelf nearby, perhaps tossed into water to improve the smell. You take a cautious sip from the ladle. It's cold, metallic, and tastes faintly of earth. You swallow and hope for the best. You think back to the yard, animals, manure, piles of refuse, and realize how porous the boundaries are. Water runs through all of it, invisible until it surfaces in a cup or a pot. No wonder ale and small beer were staples. The boiling and fermentation gave some protection. But you also remember the lead, the shared barrels, the dubious cellars. A drop from the ceiling lands on your hand. You look up. The plaster is stained with a spreading brown patch. Dampness isn't confined to cellars. It creeps into walls, rots beams, harbors mold. In winter, this room will be bitterly cold. Pipes may freeze, water stagnate. The maid might break ice on the trough just to fill a pail. Quirky sidelight. Some households hung charms over their water source, bits of iron, sprigs of ash, to ward off contamination or malevolent spirits. Cleanliness and magic mingled. You glance at the rosemary again and think of modern scented candles trying to mask bathroom smells. Some things don't change. You take one more look at the cloudy flow and then step back into the passage. The rush of water fades behind the door, replaced by the muffled sounds of the hall. You've touched another hidden layer of Tudor domestic life, the veins and arteries that feed and drain it. Without them, nothing upstairs functions. With them, everything upstairs carries a quiet risk. As you move away, you catch a faint metallic aftertaste on your tongue. It makes you wonder how many tiny hazards the body could endure before failing. One day here might be survivable. A lifetime would shape your bones, your gut, your skin. You run a hand along the wall, feeling its damp chill, and head toward the next part of the house, where a different sort of risk waits. You step back into the main passage, tongue still coated with that faint metallic tang from the water. The noise of the hall seems louder now, a low murmur of voices, the clink of wooden spoons against trenchers. Someone laughs, someone coughs. You follow the sound until you reach a pair of broad oak doors carved with simple panels. They stand slightly ajar and warm air wafts through, tinged with the scent of meat, ale, and unwashed bodies. You ease the door open and slip inside. This is the great hall at mealtime. Long trestle tables run the length of the room, benches crowded with people. The rush-strewn floor is littered with scraps, bones, crusts, bits of herb. At the far end, under a canopy, sits the master and his family at a raised board. Everyone else eats below. A fire blazes in the hearth, but the smoke hangs heavy under the rafters before finding its way out through the louver. The light is dim and orange. Shadows flickering on faces, on pewter dishes, on dogs slinking under the tables for leftovers. Mainstream fact: in Tudor households, meals were central social events. Bread, often coarse brown household bread, pottage, and ale were staples. Meat appeared more often in wealthier homes, but portions were small compared to modern plates. Forks weren't yet standard. You eat with fingers, a knife, maybe a spoon. You're seated midway down the table. Someone pushes a trencher, a flat round of stale bread, toward you. This will serve as your plate, soaking up juices until it's eaten or thrown to the poor. You sit and the smells close in. Onions, smoke, sweat, a tang of tallow candles. The person next to you tears a hunk of cheese and offers it. Across the table, a child sips from a shared cup of small beer. Everyone shares everything: dishes, drinks, air. You think of modern hand sanitizer and laugh inwardly. Quirky tidbit: some households kept a communal salsery, a dipping sauce bowl of mustard or vinegar into which everyone dunked their meat. Germs had no name yet, but you can imagine the mixing. At the high table, the master raises a cup and mutters a brief grace. The hall quiets, then erupts back into chatter as food moves down the line. A servant ladles pottage into bowls. You get a scoop, grains, peas, a scrap of bacon bobbing. It's warm, filling, faintly smoky. You lift the spoon to your lips and blow. This is sustenance, not luxury, but after the cellar and the privy it tastes good. A dog brushes your leg, sniffing for scraps. You glance down, its ribs show under patchy fur. Another sidles near the fire. Dogs aren't just pets here, they're part of waste management, eating what people leave. You break off a bit of crust and drop it. The dog snaps it up and vanishes. Historians still argue how hierarchical these meals truly were. Some accounts show strict seating orders, with servants eating only after their betters. Others show everyone at one long board, albeit with better food nearer the top. Here you sense both, deference and shared space, a microcosm of Tudor society. You notice a boy carrying a large jug of ale, refilling cups. The ale is weak but safer than water. It smells faintly sweet, slightly sour. You take a sip. The wooden cup is warm from many hands. Your tongue still tastes lead from the water, but the ale covers it. You think about how many daily calories come from this drink, how children grow up sipping it as naturally as milk. On the table lies a pie with a thick, hard crust. Someone slices it open, steam escapes, rich with spices. The filling is minced meat, dried fruit, perhaps a splash of wine. The crust itself is almost inedible, a coffin meant to hold the filling during baking. Later it will be given to servants or animals. You pinch off a bit of filling and taste nutmeg. Exotic. You imagine the trade networks that brought this spice to a smoky hall in England. The noise around your eyes, laughter, belching, a snatch of song. A fiddler appears near the hearth, tuning quickly before scraping out a tune. People clap in time. A girl dances a few steps between the benches, skirts swirling dangerously near the rushes. Someone jokes about her knocking over the mustard pot. You catch only half the words, but the tone is universal. Even in a harsh world, there's room for humor. Quirky sidelight. At some tables, salt was a marker of status. The salt cellar sat near the master. Guests above the salt were of higher rank. You glance at a small pot of coarse salt halfway down the board and wonder what it says about your place. You notice how dim it is even at midday. Candles gutter, the hearth flickers. Shadows make it hard to see your food clearly. Smells mask one another. Without refrigeration, freshness is relative. Spices hide off flavors, sauces stretch meat. You take another spoonful of pottage and try not to think too hard. Historians still argue about nutrition. Some say Tudor diets were surprisingly robust. Lots of grains, seasonal vegetables, moderate meat. Others point to malnutrition, scurvy in winter, rickets in children. You look at the pale, thin faces around you and see both possibilities. The servant passes again with ale. You refill your cup and lean back. Warmth from the fire seeps into your bones. For a moment you almost relax. The hall's noise becomes a dull hum like waves. You imagine yourself nodding off, head on the trencher, the dog curling at your feet. But then you catch a whiff of something sour, the privy nearby, or a chamber pot emptied too close to the kitchen door, and the illusion breaks. Everything here is connected, for better or worse. A bell rings, the fiddler stops. People murmur a short prayer, then start clearing. Dishes go back to the kitchen, scraps to the pigs, trenchers to the poor. Benches scrape. The hall empties slowly, leaving behind the smell of smoke, ale, and humanity. You rise, stretch, and wipe your fingers on a cloth. Your belly is full, but your senses overloaded. You slip out a side door into a cooler passage. The noise fades. Your ears ring with the sudden quiet. Ahead, another staircase winds upward. You start to climb, hands sliding along the smooth wood of the rail, wondering what new hazard or marvel waits above. You take the narrow stair slowly, one hand on the smooth wooden rail. The hall's warmth fades behind you, the air grows cooler, thinner. Up here you're moving into the private upper stories, where the family sleeps and the household keeps its stores. The smell shifts from food and smoke to something faintly musty, old wood, stale rushes, damp fabric. At the landing, a small window lets in a blade of light. Dust motes float like tiny planets. You pause, catching your breath, then push open the door ahead. The chamber you enter is larger than you expected, but the ceiling slopes low under the eaves. It's divided by wooden screens into alcoves and small closets. This is the heart of household storage: trunks, chests, and presses stacked with linens, clothing, and valuables. The floorboards creak underfoot, softer than the stone below. In one corner stands a tall cupboard with carved doors. Its iron lock gleams faintly. Against the far wall, sacks of grain are piled on wooden pallets. Above your head, bundles of herbs hang from beams, drying in the dim light. Mainstream fact: because nothing came shrink-wrapped or mass-produced, everything had to be stored carefully: cloth for making garments, spices for the kitchen, seeds for planting, wax for candles. In wealthy houses, the spicery and parlor were guarded rooms, their contents as precious as cash. Even ordinary homes kept their few linens or winter stores in chests, not closets. You run a hand over a rough oak lid. It's cold and smells of iron nails. You lift the lid. Inside is a stack of folded sheets, coarse and off-white, smelling faintly of lye soap. A few are patched, frayed at the edges. You imagine the labor behind each: spinning, weaving, bleaching. No one here has a closet full of spares. Linens are treasured, mended, aired. Quirky tidbit: some households sprinkled lavender or sweet woodruff between folds to deter moths. You see a few crushed sprigs and catch a fleeting scent, like a ghost of a garden. Historians still argue how secure these stores really were. Locks and keys existed, but servants often held them. Theft and pilfering were common. Household accounts show endless small losses: missing candlesticks, vanished bolts of cloth, spoiled wine. The locked cupboard you see may be more symbolic than effective. You move deeper into the room. The light dims. The smell of dried herbs mingles with grain dust. A cat sits atop a chest, watching you with yellow eyes. It's here for a reason: to keep the mice from the stores. You hear a faint scrabbling behind the sacks and shiver. Even in storage, pests are constant companions. On a shelf rests a row of ceramic jars sealed with wax. You pick one up. It's surprisingly heavy. The label, a scrap of parchment tied with string, is faded. Maybe peppercorns, maybe sugar, maybe something more exotic. Spices traveled thousands of miles to end up in this dark cupboard. Their cost could equal rent for months. You set the jar back carefully. A small press stands near the window, its drawers holding papers, perhaps deeds or letters. The wax seal on one is unbroken. In a world without safes or banks, the household's future can rest in a single folded document hidden in a drawer. You feel a strange intimacy, as if you're peeking into someone's diary. A servant appears, carrying a basket of clean rushes. She nods briefly, then begins stuffing them into a chest. You realize even fresh floor coverings must be stored and rotated. Nothing is static. She hums a tune under her breath, perhaps the same one the fiddler played downstairs. Quirky sidelight: some people believed that hanging a rowan branch above stored grain protected it from spoilage. You glance at the herbs overhead: sage, thyme, marjoram, and think how superstition and practical pest deterrence blurred together. Modern cedar blocks in closets aren't so different. You notice a trapdoor in the ceiling. A rope dangles. Above is the loft, perhaps the servants' sleeping quarters or simply more storage. You tug the rope and the hatch creaks. A puff of dust falls. You sneeze, eyes watering. Up there it's likely hotter in summer, freezing in winter, full of straw mattresses and thin blankets. You imagine the smell of many bodies crammed together, sweat and rushes, dreams mingling under the beams. Historians still argue about privacy. Did servants have separate sleeping spaces? Did families all bed down together? Diaries and inventories hint at both arrangements. Up here you can feel the compromise. Screens and chests forming makeshift walls, a sense of division but not isolation. You run your hand along a beam. The wood is rough, splintered. It's been here for decades, maybe centuries. Smoke from the hall has blackened it. A spider's web trembles in a draft. For a moment you imagine the family's whole life stored here, the smell of herbs, the scratch of mice, the hiss of candle flames. If fire broke out, all would be gone in minutes. You shudder. You kneel to peek under a chest. Dust, a broken spoon, a scrap of fabric. Even in careful households, debris collects. The servant glances at you, puzzled. You smile weakly and stand. The cat hops down and disappears behind the sacks. At the far end of the room, a door leads to a narrow gallery overlooking the yard. You step out. The view is of the pens and garden you saw earlier. Smoke curls from the kitchen chimney. Chickens scatter as someone crosses the yard. From up here, you see how interconnected everything is. Food stored here becomes meals below. Waste below becomes manure out there. Herbs dried above seasoned broth in the kitchen. A breeze carries in the smell of drying laundry. Down in a corner, sheets flap on a line. They're heavy, off-white, slow to dry in the damp air. You think about laundry day, hauling water, boiling, beating, wringing. No wonder linens are few and precious. You retreat back inside, letting the door click shut. The storage chamber feels quieter now, like a held breath. You've walked through the house's memory, its supplies, its future meals, its hidden luxuries. It's a fragile abundance, always under threat from pests, pilfering, fire, damp. You head toward the stair again. The servant finishes her task, hefts the basket, and follows you down. You hear the cat leap back onto its chest. The smell of herbs lingers in your hair. You realize that survival here isn't just about enduring the cold or damp. It's about constant vigilance over stores. Without them, the household collapses. As you descend the stairs, the boards creak, echoing in the shaft. You feel like you're leaving a different world, not the smoky hall or the filthy yard, but a treasure cave of cloth, spice, and seed. A world where every item has value, every scrap a purpose. You carry that thought with you into the dim corridor below, ready for the next unseen layer of Tudor life. You reach the bottom of the stairs and find yourself back in the narrow corridor you've been circling all day. Somewhere above a floorboard creaks. Somewhere below water drips steadily into a trough. The house seems to sigh around you, wood and plaster settling as evening approaches. A servant passes carrying a candle, its flame trembling. You follow her down a short passage toward a small, unmarked door at the rear of the building. The smell changes as you draw near, no longer kitchen smoke or animal dung, but something earthy and cool. The door opens onto a sloping path of packed clay leading into a semi-underground space. You duck under the lintel and step into the gloom. This is the coldest, dampest place yet, the cellar. Your eyes adjust. The space is low and vaulted, lined with rough stone that glistens with moisture. Wooden racks hold barrels of ale and wine. Hooks on the beams support sides of bacon, their fat glistening faintly. In the corner sits a great salt chest, its lid weighted with a stone to keep out vermin. The air smells of yeast, brine, and damp wood. You hug yourself, suddenly chilly. Mainstream fact: without refrigeration, cellars were the lifeline of a Tudor household. They held not only drink but preserved meat, cheese, butter, dried fish, sometimes even coal or firewood. Temperature control was rudimentary, thick walls, a north-facing slope, careful venting. The result was not a sterile fridge but a living larder, constantly at risk of spoilage. You walk between the barrels. Your fingers leave trails in the condensation on their sides. Quirky tidbit: some households added powdered mustard seed to their salt as a preservative, believing it deterred corruption. Others scattered ash on cellar floors to absorb damp. You see a gray dust in one corner and wonder if it's ash or mold. A rat scurries across your path and vanishes under the salt chest. You flinch. The cat you saw upstairs would have a feast down here. You picture servants setting traps or spreading mint leaves, thought to repel rodents along walls. Historians still argue whether such folk methods worked or were just hopeful ritual. Judging by the rat's confidence, maybe not. You kneel beside a barrel and pry at the wooden bung. A sweet malty smell rises. This is small beer, weak but sustaining, brewed regularly because water is unsafe. A servant fills jugs from it daily, hauling them up the stairs. You imagine the endless cycle of brewing, barreling, fetching. The cellar isn't a quiet store, it's a workshop in motion. Above your head hang nets of onions and strings of dried apples. Their skins are puckered but still fragrant. You reach out and touch one soft, on the edge of rot. Every item down here has a clock ticking. Without constant rotation and care, the household's winter food would vanish into mold and vermin. At the far end, a narrow door leads into an even darker chamber. You push it open. A draft of cold air flows past. Inside is a coal store, just a low space with heaps of black lumps glinting. Coal is precious fuel. Carrying it up means black dust on hands and clothes, grit in your teeth. You back out, coughing. Historians still argue about the impact of coal smoke in Tudor cities. Some say it darkened skis and lungs long before the industrial age. Others think the use was limited to certain regions. You picture all these cellars feeding hearths above, the smoke rising into narrow streets, mixing with damp air. You wander back to the main cellar and sit on a low stool. The stone is cold under you, the air heavy. You listen to the slow drip of water somewhere in the darkness. A trickle runs along the floor, feeding a shallow drain. In winter, this could flood. In summer, it could dry and stink. You're starting to see why cold, damp, and deadly isn't just a title but a lived reality. Quirky sidelight. Some houses kept a small cask of aqua vitae, a strong spirit, in the cellar for medicine or emergencies. You imagine a shot of that burning down your throat right now, warding off chill and maybe rats alike. A servant enters carrying an empty jug. She nods politely, fills it from a barrel, and climbs the steps without a word. Her candle throws wavering shadows on the stone. When she's gone, darkness thickens again. You pull your cloak tighter and stand. Enough of the underworld. You climb the stairs slowly. Each step upward feels like surfacing. The air warms a little, grows less damp. At the top you pause, hand on the doorframe, and look back into the cellar one last time. It's the hidden stomach of the house, digesting, fermenting, preserving. Without it, nothing upstairs could function. With it, you live on the edge of spoilage, pests, and cold. You close the door and find yourself back in the corridor. Evening light slants through a window, gilding dust motes. Somewhere a bell rings for prayers. You realize you've spent an entire day moving through the layers of this house, roof to floor, hearth to yard, privy to cellar, feeling each cold draft and damp touch. And you're still not sure you'd last another day. You move toward the hall where the fire burns low. Someone sets out rushlights for the night. Shadows lengthen. Your steps echo softly as you approach the bench by the hearth and sink down, eyes closing. The warmth on your shins contrasts with the cellar chill still clinging to your back. You breathe deeply, tasting smoke, herbs, ale, and something indefinably ancient. Now the wind down begins. The narrator's voice softens, slows. The flicker of the fire becomes a steady glow. The sounds of the house, animals shifting outside, water dripping in the trough, a servant's quiet tread blend into a low hum like distant rain. You imagine lying down on a pallet near the hearth, a thin blanket pulled over you, the dog curling at your feet. The rushes crackle faintly as someone walks past. Your eyelids grow heavy. The house you've explored fades into impressions. A thatched roof dripping in rain, a hearth flickering under a soot-blackened beam, herbs hanging like green ghosts above a storage chest, water trickling into a trough, a rat's quick shadow in the cellar. Each image softens, becomes part of a single long exhale. You're still aware of the cold and damp, the chill seeping up from stone floors, the draft creeping under doors, but in your imagination the fire's warmth grows, the rushes become a soft meadow, the smells mellow into something earthy and safe. The Tudor house becomes a dream house, no longer deadly but only dim and echoing. Your breathing slows to match the imagined hum of the household settling for the night. Even the narrator's voice is now just a whisper in the dark, blending with the sound of a fan or soft rain wherever you are. For a moment, you and the 16th century overlap, not as a tourist in danger, but as a sleeper under a low timber roof, listening to the world quiet. As you drift, the final thought is gentle. People survived this. They lived, laughed, danced, and raised children amid the damp and the drafts. They found warmth where they could, sweetness where it was rare, and rhythm in the chores that filled their days. You've walked their house. Now you can leave it, carrying only the story. Sweet dreams.